Hello, and welcome to another edition of Trevor's Book Club. And this month we are reviewing How the Post Office Created America, A History by Winifred Gallagher. I really enjoyed this book. Out of all the books I've read so far, this might be my favorite. It's about the United States Postal Service, which wasn't always known as that. It used to be the U.S. Post Department or something like, or Postal Department. It was actually a department of the government before it was the United States Postal Service. And this book by Winifred Gallagher, it starts out from the very beginning of when it was colonial America and explains the history of how the mail came about, basically. It's really interesting. There's tons of interesting facts in here about the post office and mail in general and stamp collecting, stuff like that. It is a really good book. It's the first book I've ever read about the post office, but it's really good. I liked it. I would definitely say it's a must-buy if you like history, and I think you should read it. And I really feel that this book really gives you a reason to appreciate everything that the United States Postal Service or the Post Office Department back in the day has done for the United States. And as the book title says, How the Post Office Created America, that is not a lie. In this, Winifred Gallagher makes the case for that being very true. It started off with people walking basically through the forest and marking trees with axes and slowly making paths that connected towns together and settlements. And then it went from people walking to people riding horses, to then to, once they started getting more mail, they started using horses and wagons. And then at one point they were using the stagecoaches to deliver the mail. And then eventually it goes to using the railroad, airplanes, cars, trucks, all kinds. And all that, helped develop the infrastructure of the United States by building dirt roads, dirt paths at the beginning, and then railways, and then roads itself, and then with the post office, it really helped develop the commercial airline industry, according to this book. And I thought that was really interesting. And it's just a really good book. And I'd like to read some excerpts from the book. So this first one was talking about the Pony Express, which, fun fact, the Pony Express originally started as a private express service to deliver the mail, and this is a little bit about it. The firm's high rates for carrying a half-ounce letter, initially $5, perhaps $75 today, later $1, attest to the demand for the service, but its revenues couldn't begin to cover the $700,000 startup cost. Everything depended on the Pony's success in winning the government's overland mail contract, which it did get the contract to deliver the mail once the Civil War started, basically, because the route that the Pony Express used didn't go through the South, which was the Confederacy during the Civil War. So that's and that was on page 131. And this next passage I'm going to read is from page 142. Despite the constraints and the low literacy rate, even among free blacks, some individuals managed to write or dictate letters to friends, family, and the abolitionists and celebrities whose support they sought, and even to masters and former masters. After he escaped from bondage while accompanying his owner to New York, John S. Jacob informed the latter of the fact in a letter wittingly signed, "No longer yours." Henry Box Brown, born enslaved in Virginia, even successfully mailed him to freedom inside a wooden crate that, with the help from a white storekeeper and an unwitting private express company, delivered him to Philadelphia. And I thought that was really interesting, because I'd heard about people mailing kids back in the day, which they used to do, mail kids, but I never heard of someone, mailing, basically themselves. But that's cool that he was able to get to freedom that way, via the post. This next passage of this book I'm going to read is about the RMS, the Railway Mail Service, which was when people would sort the mail by city on the railroad car as it went down the tracks to the next destination. Nevertheless, RPO clerks, who were known to have the hardest job in the entire department, were expected to master their pieces of the national puzzle. Only 2/5 of the applicants who passed the test for general postal clerk made the cut for this elite course. They had to be much faster and more accurate sorters than average, and to prove it by earning at least 97% on a test of their home state's hundreds of routes. Many did better. Elijah Frazier, a musician and former soldier who rose from letter carrier to RPO clerk on the line connecting Detroit and Chicago, once threw 2,444 cards with only 4 errors, setting a record of 99.49% accuracy. Most of these clerks had better than average educations, but P.J. McDonnell, an unschooled Irish immigrant, scored 99.31% on a test involving 11,743 cards, and also won a gold medal for outstanding service. Clerks trained for the Herculean feats of memorization that their job required by continually drilling with flashcards. One side was printed with a location, say Hoboken, New Jersey, and the other with pertinent railroad information such as Jersey City Direct. However, their work called for quick thinking and dealing with complexity as well as rote learning. If a train missed a connection, the clerk had to choose the best alternative route for the mail while continuing to rocket down the tracks. Letters that were headed north didn't necessarily have to wait for a northbound train, because a southbound one might be able to speed a turnback pouch to a quicker northbound connection farther down the line. Functioning as a human computer was essential, but not sufficient for success as an RMS clerk. Candidates also had to be physically hardy enough to handle 200-pound mail bags and work shoulder to shoulder for hours on end while traveling at high speed without succumbing to seasickness, a common problem. The pouch clerk, who had to drop off and pick up the leaden mail bags at train stations, was often a muscular ex-farmer. If no stop was scheduled at a particular station, he had to toss or kick the station's incoming mailbag onto the platform from the streaking train, then wield a heavy, hooked metal arm to snag the outgoing bag suspended from a crane. A miss cost him 5 demerits. So that was really interesting. I thought about the railway mail service, and I thought it would be really difficult to do that job while you're on a moving train. And then, let's see here. There's also this factoid that I thought was cool, since I'm from Kansas. Amelia Earhart, who was the first woman to solo across the Atlantic, was not an official airmail pilot, but she flew the U.S. mail at least twice. By 1939, all American aviation operated a service in a handful of eastern states that resembled an airborne division of the railway mail service, in that its planes both dropped off and picked up mail bags without landing. The outgoing sack was suspended on a rope between 2 poles, and when the pilot swooped down, a clerk caught it with a grappling hook. Flying the pickup was an extraordinarily demanding, risky, and expensive proposition, however, and in 1949, All American stopped the service and became a passenger carrier. So, I thought that was interesting. I couldn't imagine flying an airplane and trying to pick up mail at the same time. So, those are just a couple passages from how the post office created America. Other fascinating facts that I found within this book are, originally most post offices were in like pubs or general stores, and they didn't have their own post office, and everyone would go there and see if they got letters. There was no, at that time there was no people delivering house to house. They would just send the mail to the post office, and then the postmaster, who usually ran a tavern or a hotel or a general store, would hand out the mail to whoever came in and had mail. They started delivering mail, I think it was during the, I want to say it was during some war, maybe the Civil War, I think. And it was, it started off just in the city, and it was because everyone who would come back and get news that someone had died, they'd be really distressed, and at that time there were so many people going to the post office, there was like huge lines, and so in the big cities they started to deliver to the house, but that caused people to have addresses, and for cities to name streets and to number the addresses, which was fascinating because I never thought of, there being a time when buildings and businesses and houses didn't have addresses, but they all had to have addresses. And then to begin with, for several years, several decades, the people who would deliver the mail carriers, would just knock on the door and see if anyone's home. And if no one was home, they'd have to take the mail back and then try the next day to deliver when someone was home. So it was like, I can't remember what year it was, but it was in the early 1900s. They finally told everyone to put up mailboxes. So at first, people would just go from door to door hoping someone was home so they could hand them the mail. Was in 1970, Richard Nixon signed a law that changed it from the post office department to what it is now, the United States Postal Service. And so it's like a hybrid government-run business, basically. But before, it was just a government entity that wasn't that wasn't worried about making a profit. And then in 2006, they passed the Post Office Enhancement and another act, but it made it so they had to pay for their retirees' retirement like 70 years down the line or something ridiculous like that, and which has made the post office not profitable since they passed that, basically. And but recently they're trying to change that now currently. So this was a really good book. There's a ton of information about the post office that's fascinating. I didn't even mention all of it. I mean, there's tons more to read. I would strongly encourage anyone who's interested in U.S. history to read this book, because the author, Winifred Gallagher, really makes her case for the idea that the post office created America. I really think this is a great book. I would definitely say buy it. It's worth reading and then giving it to someone else that you think might want to read it. It's definitely a good book. I would definitely urge everyone to read it. And it really gives you a true appreciation for all that the post office does for the United States of America and its citizens.